Good evening and welcome on behalf of the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, Vienna School of International Studies. It's my pleasure to welcome you for this meeting on Fukushima 10 years later. You could also say 10 years after. I'm very grateful that we can do this in cooperation with Atomic Reporters, and welcome, Moni. I will give the floor to you very soon, but let me just say that why we are co-hosting this event. Because we are doing this, not because Austria is in itself using nuclear energy, but because nuclear safety is one of those issues which also our students are looking to get answers for. What is going on? How do we learn lessons from accidents and from the development of use of nuclear energy in the last decades? And I do remember that the last time here in Austria we felt very much insecure was after Chernobyl, certainly, when suddenly the reports came that there is a cloud of radioactive material which is only dependent on the wind and not on much else. And much closer to our heart is certainly now what do we learn and what did we learn from lessons from what happened at Fukushima, and to commemorate 10 years after, I think is a good moment in time to ask, where do we stand with nuclear safety? How much international cooperations do we have? Do we really work together with especially those countries where nuclear power is being used? Fortunately, in Vienna, we have the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is, I would say, the main driver of this sort of discussion. That's the way it should be. But let me just say, go back to Fukushima. I do know that many residents of the area of Fukushima are far from recovery, and the two towns which were home to the nuclear plant, they are still ghost towns. And they will stay ghost towns for a long time, just like in Chernobyl. You can see the ghost town situation there, and the only thing that you can do is have a sort of nuclear tourism going on with all the safety securities. And it is still a problem where I think, at least as far as the public is concerned, and the public includes persons like me, so foreign ministries, diplomatic academies and students, where we're not sure what's true. Just a few days ago, you could read in newspapers, what should we do with the contaminated water now, finally, in the storages around Fukushima? Should we blast it into the air? Should we bring it into the water? What is the position of the people living there? What are real facts and what is fake news about what will happen? So there are so many issues, I think, that Fukushima and other events can help us to make sure that there is a discussion necessary on these issues. And so that's a handful of reasons why we are happy to host such a meeting here also virtually at the Diplomatic Academy. This is all I wanted to say as a beginning, but I guess it's a handful already. And I'm very thankful and grateful to Mona that we can do this together. And I give the floor to you.
Thank you, dear Dr. Brix, for that very, very warm welcome. And we are very honored as Atomic Reporters to be joining you today and partnering with you on this important anniversary occasion. I would also like to welcome our participants on behalf of Atomic Reporters. And for those who don't know, and provide a brief introduction of our group. Atomic Reporters is an independent nonprofit organization with global reach, based here in Vienna, but registered in Canada. And we provide diplomats, journalists, and as Dr. Brix just mentioned, students all over the world with impartial information on nuclear issues ranging from non-proliferation, nuclear security, nuclear science, and nuclear technology. We are proud to partner with the Vienna School of International Studies for today's events, commemorating the 10th anniversary of the Fukushima disaster. 10 years ago, on 11 March 2011, a 9.0 earthquake caused a deadly tsunami, which killed more than 15,000 people. The tsunami waves also caused the triple meltdown and radiation leaks at the Fukushima-Daiichi nuclear power plant, the worst nuclear accident since the Chernobyl disaster in 1986. Just 2 weeks ago, a 7.3 magnitude earthquake struck just off the coast of Fukushima. The 10th anniversary and the recent earthquake serve as a reminder and as an opportunity to take stock of the advances and the remaining challenges in promoting nuclear safety, preventing such accidents from occurring again, and mitigating their consequences if and when they occur. Before hearing from our distinguished panel, we will hear a keynote address by Dr. Tatsujiro Suzuki, the Vice Director of RESNA, the Research Center for Nuclear Weapons Abolition at Nagasaki University of Japan. Dr. Suzuki has a very special insight into the Fukushima disaster because at the time he was serving as Vice Chairman of the Japan Atomic Energy Commission and was a member of the Japanese team that investigated the accident. He has graciously agreed to share his views with us on this occasion and to answer a few questions from Mr. Tarek Raouf, my fellow member on the Board of Directors of Atomic Reporters and the former head of Verification and Security Policy Coordination at the IAEA.
Dr. Suzuki, welcome. We are looking forward to your keynote presentation on Fukushima 10 years later.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this important workshop. I really appreciate this opportunity. My speech is, the title is, Has Japan Learned a Lesson? Fukushima 10 years later. Okay, I like to point out 5 important points to answer this question. The first is I think the energy structure and also the public opinion changed dramatically. This is one important thing that maybe Japanese society may have learned from the lesson. But second point is the accident is not over yet. Still, major risk remain at the Fukushima site, and people's evacuated from Fukushima, the life is still remain very concerned. So the second point is accident is not over yet. The third point is safety security culture of the nuclear industry. This safety security culture, even after the accident, needs to be enhanced. This is another problem I see. Number 4 point is that there are a couple of issues still unresolved, regardless of the future of nuclear power. Whether you pro or anti-nuclear power, whether you promote nuclear power more or phase out nuclear power, it doesn't matter. We have to solve these issues. Finally, I'd like to make small recommendations to move toward a more positive future, how to restore public trust and overcoming this polarized debate right now is pro anti-nuclear power is inhibiting the productive debate in Japan. So those are the 5 points I'd like to mention. Okay, big shift in energy structure. Before the accident, 54 units of nuclear power plant were operating in Japan, about 49 gigawatts. But right now, only 9 units are in operation. As of today, only 2 units are operating, 9 gigawatts. So quite significant reduction. And roughly half of the nuclear power plants are decided to be decommissioning. So right now it's up to probably only 26 or 27 units could be operated in the next probably 5 to 10 years. So the share of nuclear power plants decreased from 26% in 2010 to only 6% last year. And in order to the reduction of the increase the other power sources, coal, natural gas, and renewables increase significantly to fill the gap of the reduction of nuclear power. Public opinion sways significantly from pro to anti. In 2010, the people who think nuclear power is necessary was almost 90%, but now it's only 25% in 2013. And also the people who think nuclear power should be maintained or expanded, only 12%. Meanwhile, nuclear energy should be phased out or shut down immediately is almost 60% or more. So this is a radical change in public opinion after the accident. But right now, the government still maintains nuclear power is an important energy source. And they also, the most recent report on the carbon, to achieve the carbon neutral in 2050, nuclear power should be a part of the green growth strategy. So this is a gap between the public opinion and the government policy. Okay, the second point, decommissioning of Fukushima-Daiichi unit is still a major challenge. This is an unprecedented challenge for Japanese nuclear industry, even for the global nuclear industry. A couple of issues. Now, one important issue is so-called contaminated water from cooling the debris, field debris from the accident-prone nuclear reactors. The total quantity of tritium has to be removed from the reactor and then released to the sea. That is the government plan. And actually, this is a quite significant amount of tritium. Right now, the water, treated water is stored on the ground and has to be removed soon. By 2022, the site is already full. However, the public opposition to the current plan to reduce the water is significant. Only 13% is in favor. And also the most recent earthquake on February 13th reminded us of the risk remain at the site. The earthquake may have caused some kind of damages to the containment vessel. It is still reported that maybe the water level is decreasing on unit 3. If this continues, the fuel debris may be exposed to the air and it could reduce the radioactivity to the environment. So the risk still remains at the Fukushima site. And there is no consensus on the end state of the Fukushima decommissioning. This is another problem that the local public wants to clean up the site, but it is very difficult, technically very difficult to determine how to do with the melted fuel debris. And also all other waste, all other radioactive waste coming from the site and also coming from the decontamination, we still don't know what to do with all this waste. So the decommissioning of Fukushima-Daiichi is a major challenge. And also the economics of the accident is enormous. The total cost, accident cost, the government says it's probably 22 trillion yen, which is $200 billion or so. But one of the estimates, the think tank, said maybe it's much more than 35 to 80 trillion yen, which is 300 to 700 billion yen dollars, because the government estimate does not include the final disposal cost. So if you consider the final disposal cost, the cost could be much higher. So this is another problem for the nuclear industry. Okay, also the people who evacuate from the area, it was once more than 100,000 people evacuated. Right now, they are returning to the site, to the town, but as you can see, some of the town, only less than 10% people returned. The still red area, this area is difficult to return zone, which is on the average dose rate is 50 millisievert per year. Before the accident, the normal regulatory standard for the average exposure to the public is 1 millisievert per year. So this is much higher. And this green area you can return, but it's still the average dose rate is 20 times higher than the average dose rate which are allowed before the accident. So this is still risky area. So that's why people don't want to return. And also the compensation issue is still a big issue also. The utility have to pay, the TEPCO has to pay $27 billion so far, they are already paid, but many legal cases brought by the people who are against the utilities and also the government. So this is still continuous. Safety security culture needs to be enhanced. There was an incident, for instance, just last year, and it was revealed this February last month. there was an employee who are not supposed to enter the control room was illegally allowed to enter. Some of the employee actually changed the ID card. So this is a very significant error by the utility industry. This statement is from the chairman of the Nuclear Regulation Authority. Typical safety culture and security culture has to be improved a lot. And also Japan Atomic Power, as you can see, this has also happened last month. They erased the data which could undermine the argument which was submitted to the Nuclear Regulation Authority. Those things, this is just examples of the safety and security culture of the nuclear industry. They have to be improved. Okay. There are a couple of issues I'd like to say regardless of future of nuclear power. One big issue is spent fuel storage, second, radioactive waste, and thirdly, plutonium stockpile. These are all connected. Spent fuel storage capacity in Japan is shrinking. Almost 70% of the capacity is full at the site. And the Rokkasho reprocessing plant, which is supposed to reprocess spent fuel, the pool is already full. And there was supposed to be interim storage site is ready for accepting a spent fuel, but the local community will not accept the spent fuel until the Rokkasho reprocessing plant open. So that it is not usable right now. So this is a problem in Japan. Spent fuel is not considered as a waste, they're considered as the energy source. And it is a difficult situation right now for the utilities. And no sites still found for a high level of waste and even for the low level waste from the decommissioning of the plant. And finally, because of the past reprocessing activities, Japan has 45.5 tons of plutonium stockpile, and this has to be reduced. And we don't know how to do it at this moment unless more reactors are operating to burn plutonium. All right, finally, I'd like to make a recommendation for the more positive future. In order to overcome either pro or anti-nuclear debate, I think we have to focus on the issues that need to be resolved regardless of the future of nuclear energy, which I mentioned. And public trust, in order to restore public trust, 3 measures I'd like to recommend. One is, of course, improved transparency and complete disclosure of the information, which is not done yet. And also, the decision-making process has to be changed or improved to incorporate public opinion. And finally, independent oversight organization for policy and technology assessment is needed. That's the recommendation I'd like to make for the positive future of Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Suzuki. Thank you very much. It was an interesting but also a concerning presentation. And I found it concerning to hear that the Fukushima accident is still not over. And there are continuing risks to people and the environment. You also mentioned that the safety culture requires further enhancements and public trust in the operator remains low. As you were the previous vice chair of the Japan Atomic Energy Commission, what cooperation and assistance, in your view, is needed from the IAEA and from other states to speed up the remediation efforts at Fukushima?
Well, IAEA has already provided great assistance to us. And particularly, I would say the role of IAEA is important in providing a so-called objective, independent scientific assessment advice to both the government and to the community. IAEA came to review the operation of the decommissioning process, which was very helpful. And also for the radiation risk assessment, IAEA's advice was very useful. The people can trust more IAEA advice than the government statement.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned this issue of the cooling water, which is accumulating at the site. And also we understand there is an inflow of water through the underground channels. So I was reading a report from the IAEA that there is now approximately 1.37 cubic million cubic meters of radioactively contaminated water stored in outside tanks at Fukushima, and that this storage capacity, as you indicated, would be full by the summer of 2022.
Right.
And so the government proposed 5 options. The IAEA recommended that 2 of the 5 options were technically feasible. They mentioned vapor release and also discharge into the sea, which is what you mentioned. So they said that both of these are technically feasible. So the question I would like to ask you is, what analyses has TEPCO, the operator of Fukushima, carried out for continuous cooling and reducing the amount of water seeping in, and also ending this injected water cooling at some point, or establishing what is called a closed cooling loop?
Well, I think as you said, reducing the amount of cooling water and contaminated water is very, very important. Unfortunately, at this moment, still, you need to maintain a certain level of water, cooling water, to cool the debris right now. So the only way to reduce the contaminated water is shut down the flowing from the underground and also the rain. And that has been done. And actually, the amount of flowing water has been reduced from roughly every day, roughly 400 tons to 150 tons per day. And it should be reduced. The target is should be reduced 100 tons per day by 2025 or so. And that will help the dealing with this contaminated water. But eventually, we have to deal with this. Eventually, we have to either dispose or continuously store on the ground. It is difficult. As you suggested, TEPCO site is already full. But I think that currently the TEPCO may be thinking to expand the storage site because the public opposition is so strong, and they promised not to release the water until the public agrees to do that. So in reality, I think it is more likely that the TEPCO will expand the storage capacity. And eventually, I hope there should be an agreement between the local public and the TEPCO and the government to release the water to the sea.
Thank you. So for purposes of our audience, TEPCO stands for Tokyo Electric Power Company, which is the operator of the Fukushima reactor site. Yes.
Thank you.
So just following up, so in what regulatory standards for the discharge of the stored water before disposition, in your view, would be needed for the implementation of these 2 solutions recommended by the IAEA?
Well, TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power, and the local fishermen once agreed that the concentration of the tritium to the sea should be below 1500 becquerel per liter. Becquerel is a unit of strength of the radioactivity. The world standard, the regulatory standard of the current Japanese government is 60,000 becquerel per liter. So this is 1500 becquerel is 1/40 of the regulatory standard, which is very, very low. And this is also below WHO's regulatory standard for drinking water, which is 10,000 becquerel per liter. So I would say this is very, very low radioactivity level, which they agree. Once they agree, they will start releasing the water. The problem is that they were supposed to, TEPCO is supposed to separate other radioactive materials, which should be below the regulatory standard. But it was found later, the TEPCO did not report to the public that some of the water would contain much higher other radio materials above the regulatory standard. So that caused the mistrust between the Tokyo Electric Power and the local public. That still remains. So that is the situation right now.
So we are coming to the end of our time. So I have one final question for you. You already mentioned in your last slide some recommendations. So if you were to summarize, what lessons have been learned from the Fukushima nuclear accident and what lessons still need to be learned, especially as regard extreme events such as the large earthquake Tohoku that took place in 2011, and also the more recent one in February that you mentioned, and station blackout, which means the nuclear power station loses all sources of electric power, and also loss of coolant, which means the reactors are no longer being cooled because of the loss of power. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think the one short sentence that I use to learn the lessons learned from the Fukushima accident is think unthinkable, prepare for the worst. And that is easy to say, but it's difficult to do, actually. And even for this contaminated water case, the unthinkable case is that the water treated water could contain much higher radioactivity than they thought have eliminated. So this kind of think unthinkable practice has not been done much in Japan. Everything moves as planned. That's the Japanese society should work. And that is the problem with the nuclear industry, that they still believe that all the plants can operate as planned. And also, this was just a TEPCO's problem, not our problem. That is the attitude, but other utilities. I think that should change. Finally, I would like to say again that the trust issue is the most important aspects of the lesson we learned from the accident. I think without public trust, we cannot move on to the next phase of the either decommissioning or even promoting a nuclear power. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Dr. Suzuki, for joining us today from Nagasaki University and sharing your important assessments with us. So I thank you again on behalf of both organizers of this event. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you very much.
So we heard a very interesting discussion with Dr. Suzuki from Japan. We had a brief discussion in there about the regulator. The IAEA advises its member states that they need to have an independent regulator, and we have one today. We have Dr. Annatina Müller-Germanà. She's the head of international affairs at the Swiss Federal Nuclear Safety Inspectorate, ENSI, where she leads its international projects at the IAEA and the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency. Dr. Müller-Germanà, we look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much, and it's an honor for me to participate at this very important discussion. I have made a brief presentation and I will show it to you. Well, welcome. It's an honor for me to make a short presentation about the lessons learned of the Fukushima-Daiichi accident in Switzerland. I mean, Switzerland is thousands and thousands of kilometers away, but it had considerable impact into how we make our oversight, but also how in the future Switzerland will be getting its energy from. And you will see this in my presentation. Well, very shortly after the accident, what happened? What we did as regulator, and ENSI is the abbreviation of the Swiss Federal Nuclear Safety Inspectorate, which is the independent regulator of Switzerland that does the oversight of Swiss nuclear installations. Well, what we did is that we immediately ordered actions and additional safety tests for the Swiss nuclear power plants. And I will make some brief introduction in what these actions were. Well, we also made a lot of analyses. We had to examine the designs that we have in Switzerland, if there are some similar technical similarities of the design in Fukushima and also of the Swiss nuclear power plants. We did very fast, we did focused inspections about station blackout, about the loss of coolant accident, about the flooding, about various dangers and hazards that the nuclear power plants in Switzerland are facing. And what we did very quickly was that we requested the Swiss nuclear power plants to backfit additional water supply connections to the spent fuel ponds. This was done not even 6 months after the Fukushima-Daiichi accident. So it's something that was very quickly done. What we also did was that we asked the NPP operators to establish an external storage facility for emergency equipment by the 1st of June 2011. This is 3 months after the accident, and I will show you what this storage facility is about. We asked all our NPP operators, according to the technical lessons learned that we had seen from Fukushima, to install diversified ultimate heat sinks in the reactors to significantly improve the spent fuel pool cooling system of all nuclear power plants. We asked the Swiss NPPs to reassess the design of their NPPs with respect to earthquakes, with respect to external flooding, and as Mr. Suzuki just said, think the unthinkable and in the combination of both events. We also participated as a non-EU country in the so-called EU stress test, which was a EU-wide exercise to additional for a very thorough and in-depth examination of the safety of the European nuclear power plants. And we also reviewed the protection measures for the Swiss population according to the lessons learned that we have learned from Japan. And one of the major lessons that we have, and I think this is a lesson that we always have to keep in mind, and it is our greatest lesson that we have learned for Switzerland, is that safety is not a state. Safety is a process. Nuclear safety does not have to be understood as a state, but as a process of continuous improvement of the technology and of the various equipment and the various nuclear power plants. So what did we do? We have here in this table a few backfittings that we requested our nuclear power plants to do. So we asked them to backfit their temperature instrumentation for the spent fuel pool for almost all of the nuclear power plants. We asked them to backfit their nuclear power plants for a new spent fuel pool cooling system. This is not something that costs a little money, but a lot of money. We asked them to improve the earthquake resistance of spent fuel storage buildings for those that, of course, are relevant and had to do something about it. And we also, as I said previously, backfitted the diversified heat sink at the Swiss nuclear power plants. So we really asked our nuclear power plant operators, according to the major technical lessons learned from Fukushima, to backfit their nuclear installations. And one of the most significant measures that we asked our nuclear power plants operators to do is that they should together, we have 4 nuclear power plant operators in Switzerland, and that the 4 of them basically have to find a location approximately 50 kilometers away from the nuclear power plants where they could store all the emergency equipment that would be needed in the case of a severe accident. Because this is one of the lessons that we have learned also from Fukushima. Do not only store all your emergency equipment on site, because if you have flooding, if you have earthquake, if you have any other type of hazard, then eventually they will not be available again. And that's why we asked our operators to find a bunkered army depot and to store their diesel generator, inclusive of fuel pumps, cables, boric acid, other radio protection equipment, and other things that they need in case of a large accident. And these tools would then be shifted by helicopter from the Swiss Army to the relevant nuclear power plants should there be a severe accident and the on-site emergency preparedness tools would not be available anymore. So this is one things that we have installed 3 months directly after the Fukushima accidents. But what we also did, and you can find this on our website, is that we have made a various analysis on the consequences and the lessons learned from Fukushima. We made an analysis, a technical study on the consequences of Fukushima. We did a radiological consequences report. We made a lessons learned report. We also just published last year our last report related to Fukushima, which is a safety culture report. What does Fukushima mean in terms of safety culture and how do we have to improve ourselves? And based on all these studies that we have made, we have, of course, elaborated an action plan Fukushima, in which all the measures that are taken at the NPP operators, but also at the regulator, at ourselves, were implemented, and the status of implementation was yearly updated and reported on our website. But what was also the lessons learned of Fukushima in Switzerland? And one major lesson learned was, of course, a political one, which was the Swiss government and the Swiss population decided to phase out from nuclear energy. So what this means was that basically we have just 3 years ago, the Swiss people and the Swiss government adopted the new energy strategy 2050, which means that the existing nuclear installations can still continue operating as long as we as a regulator consider them to be safe. But as soon as we as a regulator would say that they are not safe anymore, they would have to permanently shut down. This also means that we cannot have any new reactor in Switzerland for the moment. So the new build projects that were actually planned to be started in the year 2011 in Switzerland were suspended. And of course, so we cannot have any new nuclear power plant in Switzerland anymore because it's written in the law. So you see, even though an accident is very far away, it had significant political consequences to Switzerland as we are phasing out of nuclear energy. However, what we also saw at the international level was that we really wanted that the lessons learned from Fukushima should not only remain in Japan, but that we as an international community had a responsibility to act and to basically engage ourselves for those lessons learned that were identified after Fukushima. And what we thought as Switzerland was particularly important was to establish an international harmonized state-of-the-art for safety standards, that we should encourage international peer reviews and periodic safety reviews, and especially as it was a problematic issue in Japan, make sure that regulatory authorities are de facto and de jure independent, which means not only de facto, but de jure means that they are legally and financially 100% independent from ministries that promote the use of nuclear energy. So how did we do that? Well, we significantly increased our international commitment in the aftermath of Fukushima. We, as I said, we participated in the EU stress test and in the topical peer review afterwards. We had ourselves regularly reviewed by the IAEA as advisory services to really strengthen our regulatory framework and how we understand our oversight work. We also had the chairmanship of the Western European Nuclear Regulators Association for 8 years, and we tried to engage ourselves and to bring this philosophy of continuous improvement into not only, of course, into European regulatory bodies, but also around the world. And how did we do that around the world? Well, what we tried to do was to basically take the major technical lessons learned from the Fukushima accident into a international agreement. Well, the only, let's say, legally binding instrument in the field of nuclear safety is the so-called Convention on Nuclear Safety, CNS. And what Switzerland tried to do in the year 2013 until 2015 was to propose an amendment to this convention to basically tackle into this CNS the most important lessons learned, which are the reduction of potential releases to new builds and existing nuclear power plants, and of course to avoid any future long-term contamination of after any type of nuclear accident. So unfortunately, our proposal to amend the Convention on Nuclear Safety for various political reasons was not successful, but in the end, we had a diplomatic conference in 2015, which basically took our principles and our understanding of an improved safety and of this continuous improvement philosophy into a declaration, which is the Vienna Declaration on Nuclear Safety. And this declaration basically enshrines 3 principles, and they are that new nuclear power plants are to be designed consistent with the objective to prevent accidents, and should an accident occur, mitigate possible releases of radionuclides causing large or early radioactive contamination. That safety improvements should be implemented in existing nuclear power plants that are oriented to meet the above objective, and that the national requirements and regulations for addressing this are to take into account the relevant IAEA safety standards. So we managed at the diplomatic level to have a political commitment to this Vienna Declaration on Nuclear Safety, and now after every 3 years, during the regular review conferences of this Convention on Nuclear Safety at the IAEA in Vienna, the implementation of this declaration is assessed by the relevant contracting parties. So this was one move how we tried to incorporate the lessons learned from Fukushima into a political declaration. But my last slide, lessons learned, not learned from Fukushima. We have seen as Switzerland that there were many international initiatives after Fukushima within the IAEA, within the EU, within WENRA, within the Nuclear Energy Agency. A lot of work was done by these organizations in studying the accidents, in incorporating the lessons learned in the safety standards, but also the national regulators did a lot of work, especially in Europe, with various reassessments and adaptations of their national framework. But from our point of view, the biggest and most important lessons learned is clearly to say that safety is not a state. safety is a process, and we need to continuously ask ourselves, are we on the right track? Can we not improve ourselves further? We have to improve our safety culture. We have to continuously improve the safety of our nuclear power plants, because as Benjamin May says once, the tragedy of life is often not in our failure, but rather in our complacency. And complacency does not have any room in nuclear safety. So this would be my remarks about this. And thank you very much for inviting me for this panel.
So Dr. Müller-Germanà, thank you very much for a very detailed presentation. I had several questions and you have answered all of them in your presentation. I think your presentation also would be very reassuring to Austrian citizens, because even though Austria has rejected nuclear power, it still buys nuclear power from Switzerland. And so some of the power we are using here in Vienna for this presentation and our lights is of course coming from nuclear reactors in Switzerland. And I think we're very impressed with the safety measures that Switzerland has put in place. And I'm very pleased to welcome a colleague of both Mona and I when we were at the agency, Mr. Gustavo Caruso. He's the director of the Office for Safety and Security Coordination at the IAEA and the scientific secretary of the upcoming International Conference on a Decade of Progress after Fukushima-Daiichi, which will be held in November, which was postponed from last month. And I would like to thank Director General Rafael Grossi for making available to us Mr. Caruso this evening. So Gustavo, all yours.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Brix. Thank you, Mona. Thank you, Tariq. It's a pleasure to me to be here, also with the colleagues of Suzuki and Annatina. Thank you for organizing this event that for us is very important. As we mark the solemn occasion of the 10th anniversary of Fukushima, it is also vitally important to state that the global nuclear safety is better than before. It's better than March 11, far better. In fact, all safety-related areas, it was everybody made a lot of improvements, are still doing improvements, basically in order to focus on lessons from the Fukushima-Daiichi 1 decade ago. This, of course, these positive trends we need to continue, is continuing in order to improve safety. Safety is a continuous improvement process. Therefore, we in the agency, we want to use the positive situation that we have now, that to use the momentum that nuclear safety is better than ever in this moment. 10 years ago, just to give some feedback, it was mentioned, but I would like to highlight again that there was a great East Japan earthquake, totally unprecedented in the area of Ring of Fire, where more than 450 volcanoes we have. This 9 magnitude level seismic issue was impacting the structures, basically. And the plants respond, as it's important to say, the plants respond to the earthquakes properly. Even this earthquake, even in some cases, they expected. The plants were shut down, the systems respond properly. However, a tsunami came after, some minutes after. And then the tsunami struck a very wide area of the coast of Japan, flooding. I think it's very important to say the context, flooding more than 500 square kilometers, more than 500 square kilometers, just to show the context where this is not only the situation of the plants, where it was a global environmental situation of flooding. These waves, of course, reaching the very high levels, more than 15 meters, and then they breach the safety barriers, several safety barriers of the plants, and of course, with the complicated and some cases catastrophic consequences, that 3 reactors cores were damaged, releasing radioactivity to the environment. At the agency, I always remember that Saturday morning where we received information from Japan around 8 o'clock here, 3 something in Japan. And that morning of the accident, then the Japanese immediate communicate to us what is, to our counterparts, to the people, what is going on. And then we react immediately to help, to offer our offices and to monitor the situation that affect the nuclear power plant. We also established teams on the, we offered to Japan to send teams for helping measurement, monitoring of the radiological safety issues. We also put to disposition our labs in Monaco to review all the environmental data that in order to help with Japan, in particular the marine monitoring, the terrestrial environment samples, and to make independent analysis of the situation. It might also be said that in spite of the core damages, because in nuclear engineering, we're also thinking that one core damage, but in this case were 3 core damage almost at the same time, some hours differences, but almost at the same time. There was never we never imagined that this could happen, and it led, of course, to the release of the environment, to the material to the environment. Of course, there was the Japanese initiated several actions, cutting the food, milk, based on the Chernobyl lessons, in order to avoid to have thyroid issues to the children in particular. Therefore, with all of this, our evaluation together with the UNSCARE, that there is no effect that could be attributed to the radiation, because basically, based on environmental and personal monitoring, those data, the effective doses carried by members of the public were very low, and generally in most of the cases comparable with the range of effective dose that we get with in the global levels of natural background of radiation. Therefore, and this is let's say the positive aspect, that to say that in spite of the 3 core damage melting reactor cores, there were not any situation on health related to radioactive situation, to radiation. The Fukushima accident also prompt the major international initiatives spearheaded by the IAEA to further boost nuclear safety, leading to substantive advances in areas from the operational safety to the emergency preparedness and response through all way through, that there are many areas, steps that we are involved, like safety assessment, like system analysis, like accidental sequences and consequences. And then the accident also led to substantive advances in the area from health, from technology, from culture, from different areas where this accident clearly demonstrated that there are several things that we need to consider, and they were considered after that, in these 10 years. Each one of the nuclear accidents, as you know, from the first one was 1979, the TMI, 3 Mile Island. There were not basically major issues or released to the environment. In 1986, Chernobyl was one of the key, when a major accident in terms of release to the environment of the very important inventory of radioactive material from the reactor core. This resulted in the several consequences, and of course Fukushima, that there was highlighted a number of lessons that we focused on since 10 years, and also building on good practices to commit to ensure the safe and secure operation of nuclear facilities. We, the IAEA, has a very proactive, stepped up effort to bring the international community into this effort to get member states to a single platform to promote nuclear safety by taking tangible and effective steps at incorporating safety measures and processes in plants or nuclear facilities being built, and to improve nuclear safety at the operational level and in all the operational states, even during the design and the commissioning. The accident, of course, this accident underlined the vital importance of the international cooperation that, as I mentioned before, was clearly reinforced. Mr. Suzuki mentioned key aspects regarding the international cooperation efforts, and Annatina mentioned that the consequence in Switzerland, for example, and at the IAEA, we expand all this synergy to all member states in order to be sure that everybody capture what is necessary to learn to make our facilities or installations safer. The IAEA, we in 2011, in September 2011, we developed an action plan on nuclear safety that it was endorsed by all member states in September 2011. And what we did is we defined the program work to strengthen the global safety framework in response to any accident, not only the Fukushima type, to any accident, how to improve safety considering everything that can happen. As you know, from the engineering point of view, the most important aspect to avoid release of radiation to the environment is to avoid the core damage. And to avoid the core damage, basically we need to have energy power, we need to have power, we need to have cooling. And these actions were the main focus of attention for all member states during the last 10 years. Therefore, there is a very important increase of reliable cooling and energy power to all nuclear reactors to be sure that anything can happen to guarantee the reactor cooling and energy power in any condition, even considering that Fukushima type accident can happen again. As part of the work under the action plan, all our member states introduced many measures to enhance safety. And we basically divide in many key areas different programs. In the agency, we developed more than 1,000 projects in order to support our member state in different safety improvements, in different options that they consider at the national level to fill any gap or to improve even the existing situation until now. Subsequently, the Fukushima report, we were able to produce a very important report. By the way, one of the most consulting documents for the whole history of the IAEA, has the main report, what we call the Green Report, and then 5 technical volumes. And these technical volumes will distill and assembly all lessons from the accident. And basically the intention was to provide the knowledge base for the future, for anything. For everything can be traced in our report, is written there. It was a result of very extensive international collaborative effort. We involved about 180 experts from 42 countries, not only nuclear power countries without nuclear power, countries that are against, for different reasons, nuclear power. They were also working with us writing the report. And of course, we involve in this report several international bodies, sisters organizations from the United Nations that collaborated with us to demonstrate that we all together in this objective, what we can do, how to disseminate all what we learn in order to reduce at the minimum possible that this happen again. It provides basically the description of the accident, what happened, the causes why the accident happened, how the accident evolution, what was the evolution, and the consequences based on all the evaluation that we received, and a very large number of sources that were, let's say, validated by the Japanese permanent mission in Vienna in order to be sure that we are taking official and reliable information. And we summing up around 400 references in our documents that are one of the most important in the world, of course, starting from all the Japanese very dense and detailed reports that were producing in different steps during these last years, the last 10 years. The agency work, including strengthening safety standards. As you know, the first thing that we did is we review our situation of safety standard, where we are, if there is any improvement, if there is something that, of course, we found a lot of things that we can improve. However, I have to say that that many of the lessons from Fukushima were already before the accident in our standards. We also improve our peer reviews in order to be sure that we are focused to several different lessons from this accident when we go to different peer review, for example, to regulatory bodies, or to review the operational safety of the nuclear power plants, how these lessons were considered properly at each one of the installations that we visited, and which kind of recommendations we can provide in order to make nuclear power safer, and how we can enhance efforts to assist member states in building capacity, basically, for safety. This is not only for member states that are having already nuclear power plants, also for those that are thinking embarking to nuclear power. And this was a very good, very important topic, because this is the first question that we receive at the IAEA, how this lesson can be capitalized in order to support our member states that are thinking to have nuclear power plant in the near future, how to be sure that all lessons are incorporated in their programs. This was done with the support of Technical Cooperation Department, with the Nuclear Energy Department. All together, we try to refocus on how this goal can be achieved. At the IAEA, we identify which are the most important areas where we need to share and to receive and to learn from member states different technical aspects. And we, based on that, we organize 15 international expert meetings where you can consult all these 15 documents in the IAEA. And also we made more than 14 or 15 international expert missions to Japan in several areas, such as safety assessment, external events, radiation monitoring, decommissioning, remediation, among others. And you can also find all these reports on the international expert missions, international expert meetings in the IAEA website. These are public reports, and you can identify what were the lessons learned that we intend to disseminate and to share with our member states. There were key areas where significant progress was produced, in particular assessment of all safety vulnerabilities of nuclear power plants. All member states, as Annatina mentioned, what we so-called in Europe stress test, resilience analysis in other parts of the world, but all countries with nuclear power reassess the design of the nuclear power plant against, in general, extreme natural hazards, installing, as I mentioned before, additional sources for backup electrical power, additional sources for backup supply of water for cooling reactors, and strengthening protection against all extreme external events in a very conservative way, thinking what is the worst can happen, and this what was the member states identified. And of course, this work is not 100% finished yet, but most of the countries already made a major part of the work, and this work will continue. As I mentioned before, nuclear safety is a continuous improvement effort. We strengthen the peer reviews. And another conclusion is the peer reviews were mentioned as part of this brainstorming we did all with our member states. All our peer reviews are key to identify gaps. When there is an issue in any member states or a problem, any kind of problem, of course, the agency is ready to support. We can get the best expert in the world to support member states to try to solve the problem and to be anticipated to the problem. But of course, these are voluntary based, is upon request. If member states are interested, of course, we are ready to support. If they identify something that the agency can also give an added value. Today, as I mentioned, the safety standards represent the international consensus. What constitutes a high level of safety? This is already in the standards. Improvements done in emergency preparedness and response capabilities. You know, we after Fukushima, we consolidated a network, how we can identify the best and the sharp knowledge in different countries of the world to put together in a network where we need this support. We put all these best experts and tools together in order to assist any member state in emergency situations or response capabilities. Capacity building, you know, this is the modern term that we are defining things that involve, as well, of course, education and training, but also involve staff development, involve networking, and we improve a lot of networks. We have in the agency many networks, the Global Nuclear Safety and Security Network. We have regional networks that all of them, African network, Ibero-American network, all of them were fed with all synergies in order to be sure that all what we know is disseminated all through our member states. Safety culture, Annatina mentioned, Mrs. Suzuki mentioned as well, it was one of the center of gravity of the problems. Not only the accident in Fukushima, the Chernobyl and others accidents, even minor accidents, but important ones. Safety culture was the common denominator in most of the problem. Today, Fukushima again confirmed also, once again, that safety is not only technology. Safety is technology, people, and organizations. When we say people, how these people behave, how the people were trained, how the people demonstrate the safety culture. Organizations, how the organizations are supporting their staff in order to always say that safety first. Safety first not needs to be said, needs to be demonstrated by actions, by facts. Like all what we learn in safety is fine, the agency is sharing, but member state has the important role to implement the lessons, not only to know the lessons, also to implement.
Gustavo,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. We are going quite over time, so if it's okay with you, you actually made a good presentation. You can conclude, and then we can have a little discussion, and you can make more points.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Let me conclude. Probably myself, and my colleague Annatina were probably beyond the constraint given by you. But okay, just to say, the 10 years on, the tremendous progress of upgrading nuclear power has been achieved, and basically we want to conclude or to demonstrate why safety we are better on the safety part in the safety area in all nuclear power with our conference that you, Tariq, mentioned that will be in November this year, how to build on the lesson learned from strengthening nuclear safety. And we expect that this conference will attract a massive audience, not only on safety. Every a person dealing in the nuclear matters, dealing with this important area, will share with us, and we will discuss key elements that we learned in these 10 years and needs to be shared with all member states. Thank you, Tariq, and I am to your disposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. I apologize for interrupting you, but you had a very rich presentation, as was that of Dr. Germanà. So we have had 3 nuclear accidents, as you mentioned, 3 Mile Island in the US in 1979, Chernobyl in Ukraine in 1986, and then Fukushima-Daiichi in Japan in 2011. But still, states regard nuclear safety a national responsibility, and they are unwilling to assign to the IAEA a mandatory role in carrying out safety reviews and assessments. And Gustavo, you mentioned many of the agency's activities in this regard, and one of the important missions that the IAEA carries out is OSART, which is an operational safety and review team. But again, this is at the request of the state. The IAEA cannot demand such a safety review, which is quite different from that of safeguards. So first Gustavo, and then Dr. Germanà, could you say a few words why there is this resistance to give the world's nuclear regulator, so to speak, the IAEA, more authority with regard to nuclear safety reviews and assessments?
Well, the decision why this is a national decision. All the member state decided this. Of course, this is not mandatory in nuclear safety and nuclear security. However, is different for the safeguard situation. This is a decision that member state took. However, from that perspective that we are, when we know we have a very clear where we are doing our best. We are doing our best, and now our best is to focus on how we can, having said this statutory function you mentioned before, nuclear safety and nuclear security is not mandatory, is upon the request, how to convince member states that to work together in the international environment. In particular today, that the nuclear power is one of the lowest carbon technologies available to generate electricity. As our DG mentioned several times, this should be, of course, considered as one of the drivers in the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, for example, in this year. It is an important contribution that nuclear science and technology can make in combating climate change. This needs to be basically recognized. But this is our role. We need to say, to work with our sister organization in UN. We need to say exactly what happened. We are not belongs to anyone. We are the United Nations. We are. Everybody can trust on us. We are, when we talk about the consequence of an accident regarding radiological, regarding radiation issues, we are saying the truth. We are saying always asking the best expert in the world and summarizing and giving to the society what is the conclusions and lessons learned, as we did in Chernobyl, as we did in Fukushima, we did in other accidents. Therefore, we know very well where we are. We are focused on helping member states in spite of this situation. Can be in another situation, can be mandatory, non mandatory, doesn't matter. Our role is, the goal is to make the use of radiation safer. This is the role.
Thank you. So Dr. Germanà, I would like to hear your views on the same question. And you mentioned in your presentation that Switzerland did take this initiative after Fukushima to try and strengthen the Convention on Nuclear Safety and make it more mandatory, because this convention is still an incentive convention. But some of the major users of nuclear power resisted, and then you pointed out the compromise of a diplomatic conference. But a diplomatic conference is not the same as strengthening a convention. So for example, we strengthened the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material. But why is there this resistance to strengthening the role of the agency? And you are also a regulator for Switzerland, so I would be interested, or this audience would be interested in your views on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I think this is a very interesting question also from an international relations point of view. Well, coming to your first question about why the IAEA has no mandatory role in assessing the safety of nuclear power plants. Well, as Gustavo said, it's a sovereign decision of the member states, and unfortunately, for various political reasons, the member states have decided to do so, and I think this will be very difficult in the future to have a mandatory IAEA review services for the safety of nuclear installations, just for various political reasons. However, this should not, make us sad or preoccupied, because nowadays you have peer pressure, and peer pressure within the IAEA and within the international conventions that exist in the field of radioactive waste management, the Joint Convention, or nuclear safety, the CNS, give a very, very strong incentive to the various states to really regularly assess not only the safety of their installations, but their regulatory framework through the IAEA. During these convention review meetings that take place during practically every 3 years, the contracting parties identify measures for improvement of the various countries that participate. And of course, if you have every 3 years all the contracting parties of the convention asking another state to do something, be it an IRS mission or anything else, that increases the pressure on that state, of course, to do so and to really have itself regularly reviewed by the IAEA. So you can circumvent that lack of mandatory IAEA missions in general. Another option is that you not only, it doesn't necessarily have to be the IAEA that becomes or gives mandatory review missions around the world, but you can also do it in your own national legal framework, as it is done, for example, in the EU or in Switzerland, where it is written in our nuclear energy law that we have to have ourselves assessed every 10 years at the latest by the IAEA in how we implement the IAEA safety standards. And of course, this is also done within the EU. So you can put this mandatory perspective into your own legal framework. Of course, you're free to do so. And I think that peer pressure as well is significantly increasing, especially after the accident of Fukushima. And that helps a lot to put certain states under pressure that they should have themselves regularly reviewed by the IAEA.
Thank you very much. So we had a question from Nuclear Intelligence Weekly for Dr. Suzuki, but the segment with Dr. Suzuki was recorded, so he's not with us live. So another question which some people in the audience are interested is this relationship between nuclear safety and nuclear security. And as we know, there is always this tension. If we make a facility very secure from a security point of view, we may have some implications for nuclear safety. So perhaps we start with Dr. Germanà first, and then we go to Mr. Caruso. As we are running over time, we'd be grateful for a little bit shorter answer, and we can go for another 10 or 15 minutes, if that's okay with both of you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for this question. Well, of course, nuclear safety and nuclear security go hand in hand. And this is, at least from a regulatory perspective, we in Switzerland, we approach nuclear safety and nuclear security together in an integrated manner. So every time we ask our nuclear power plants operator to do some safety upgrades or some sort of analysis or other things, nuclear security is always taken into consideration, and vice versa. If we ask them to, for example, make a security measure to implement them, we will always analyze the consequences that this will have for nuclear safety. So in Switzerland, we have a so-called integrated approach. So we really consider the interfaces between nuclear safety and security in a coordinated manner. And so this is the approach that we perform in Switzerland. But of course, at other regulatory bodies, this is done a little bit differently.
Thank you. Mr. Caruso?
Well, thank you. I think we need to, when we talk about safety and security, we need to know and to understand that we are only focused when we talk about security, the nuclear part. We are a very small sector of the nuclear security, of the security part of our member state. Therefore, if we go to the goals, the goals are very similar. It's to protect the people and environment to the harmful effects of ionizing radiation. And irrespective of the circumstances, if it's a failure of the plan, it's a malevolent act, and there are also things that are shared between safety and security very properly. For example, there are similar concepts to protect the people. However, there are also differences. For example, when we talk about safety culture and security culture, the most important consideration of safety culture is the transparency and the openness. And in the security culture cannot be transparency enough because there are confidentialities. There are also issues of the aspect that needs to be taken into account because of the safety security integration. We need to be very clear and sure where when we are taking measures for safety, we will not compromise security, and vice versa. For example, if we protect a particular component with a lot of physical protection, when people in safety need to access to this component for emergency situation, it's a problem. Therefore, we need to balance to this particular aspect and to improve the synergy and the awareness of this clear intersection between safety and security. Safety and security in the agency is an important topic. We already made one important technical meeting where we discussed with all member states what are the synergy, how to manage safety and security, and how to manage when the decisions need to be taken. Therefore, for us, it's a current topic. We developed some documents already, but we still need to discuss more with our member state and with the Commission of Safety Standards and the group that is dealing with security guidance in order to be sure how we can complement each other in this particular endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll have 2 more questions and then we can wrap up. So today there are about 454 reactors in 30+ countries. About half of this fleet is quite old. They may be midlife or they are under service life extensions. So Gustavo, from an agency point of view, how is the agency ensuring that the service life extensions of the older reactors are being done properly and that standards of safety are being maintained and that corrosion in the calandria and other technical problems are properly dealt with so we don't have any weak points in the reactor from a safety perspective?
Thank you, Tariq. Very, very good question. I think the global fleet, of course, is getting some older. There are several new plants that are coming, but the global fleet is getting older. And the lifetime of the existing plants are being, in several cases, many cases, extended beyond the current licensing period. Basically, the countries are introducing measures that, like safety upgrades, to meet today's regulatory requirements. And more member states are giving the high priority to continue to operate the existing fleets as long as possible, because there are many reasons, also the economical reasons. While this decision concerns basically focus on economy or the economic situation viability, all are grounded in the premise of maintaining plant safety. This is a very important topic. The reactor lifetime extensions, they basically will help us also to find the climate targets. For example, nuclear power is not only reliable 24/7 sources of low carbon electricity, and this also provide a backup in the energy system if we want to increase or high shares of renewables and balance with the grid in absence of any other power generation. Therefore, we are focused on helping member states on this aging situation. We created a specific, you mentioned before, Tariq, these missions that we call safety aspect for long-term operation, that we recommend member states what action they need to take in order to keep safety, but extending the lifetime of the nuclear power plant.
Thank you. So Dr. Germanà, in your presentation, you showed us the 4 reactors in Switzerland. They are sort of 30 or 40 years old, and I was reading that ENSI has the authority to give 10-year life extensions. Is that correct? And you also mentioned that if your inspectorate decides that the reactor is not safe, you would ask the operator to stop it. So could you briefly elaborate a little bit more as to what are the criteria that you are using to judge the safety of these reactors and the criteria for giving them the life extensions?
Thank you very much for this question. Well, we have, before answering it, eventually it's noteworthy to know that in Switzerland we have a very interesting system on regarding licenses of nuclear installations. Apart from Switzerland, only a few other countries know the system on unlimited licenses. So what this means is that actually the nuclear power plants in Switzerland can operate it without time limits, but every 10 years they have to make a very thorough periodic safety evaluation, a so-called periodic safety review. And after their 40th, let's call it anniversary or age of operation, they also have not only to do a very thorough periodic safety analysis and evaluation, but they also have to make the long-term operation proof. So not only do they have we have an very extensive guidelines requiring various technical aspects relating to aging management, corrosion, emergency preparedness, radiological protection, long-term operation aspects, severe accident management, etc., that have to be assessed. Of course, also security topics are looked into, and as soon as they approach their 40th year of operation, they also have to do the proof if they are fit for long-term operation. And this is an additional set of very detailed technical criteria that look into various aspects of long-term operation of especially those equipments at the nuclear installations that you can not exchange, like for example the reactor pressure vessel or other issues. So we have very extensive safety evaluations, and we have a very extensive regulatory framework that really detail very specifically what has to be looked at and by the operators and how we are going to assess it afterwards.
Thank you. So I'll come to the last question very briefly, coming back to you, Gustavo. In our discussion with Dr. Suzuki, we mentioned there's approximately 1.37 million cubic meters of radioactively contaminated water that needs to be somehow dealt with by the summer of next year. And the IAEA, of the 5 options suggested by Japan, approved the vapor release and the discharge into the sea. So how can the agency reassure the Japanese public that the standards that the IAEA is proposing that Japan meet for such discharges would be such that the environment and people's health is not damaged or affected negatively.
Well, thank you, Tariq. Well, one of the challenges that, as you mentioned, is the how to manage this water. When we said contaminated water, we have to be careful because the water that they are planned to put in the sea, if they decided, or evaporated, whatever is the solution is taken, is already we call Alps water. Alp is a water that is already treated. It's a treated water, basically with almost without any other chemical or radioactive element except tritium. And then this is the water, and that we, in the latest IAEA, the commissioning review mission that we did in 2018, we advised to Japan to take a decision urgently. Some decision needs to be taken because they continue accumulating water that at the site. And you know very well that in general, all plants are releasing authorized radioactive release at far below the natural level, And this is probably could be the same example. The Japanese expert committee report was submitted to the last year to the government, outlined basically these two options of the release the water by vapor release or discharge in the ocean. We are ready to support Japan in order to properly discharge our statutory functions. It means that we are ready to cooperate with Japan to see the application of the IAEA safety standards in all this process before, during, and after if they decided to release the water. And then basically, as I mentioned, this will not be different that around the world, many nuclear power stations discharge this very low level, and the dilution in the sea will be very high. Then will be even less than that. But of course, we need to work with Japan. We need to discuss our process. We often say that once the decision is taken, we, the agency, we are ready to assist in this implementation. For example, radiation monitoring, reassuring basically to trust with the public. I think we believe that the agency is key on that, will help a lot in Japan and elsewhere, that any release of water would be, of course, within the international standards. And then, as independent and respected the international institution, we, the agency, we can play a very constructive role, both technically and politically based.
Thank you. So the last question to you, Dr. Germanà, you are a nuclear regulator, and at the IAEA every September at the General Conference is the meeting of the senior regulators from other countries. Now, of course, people know that Switzerland has very high standards, but as a regulator, there might be regulators in other countries where perhaps the standards are not that high, and perhaps the independence of the regulator is not as high or cannot be assured. So as a Swiss regulator, when you are dealing with your peers, since we mentioned peer reviews, how are you sort of communicating the lessons learned or the practices, good practices of Switzerland be recommended to others for them to consider to implement in their own nuclear power programs?
Thank you very much for this important question. Well, I think that, of course, Switzerland is one example that could have some, let's call them good practices to be shared with other countries. Of course, other countries have the same as well. So what we do is, especially, as you mentioned, the IAEA General Conference. So what we do usually is that we have a lot of bilateral meetings with various countries that we think are interesting, that we can learn from them, and eventually they can learn from us. So we meet with them on a regular basis, and we exchange. We make cooperation agreements, bilateral cooperation agreements with some countries that eventually need our help or are interested in receiving help from the Swiss regulator, and we provide assistance to strengthen their regulatory framework or to assist them in becoming members to international conventions or attending conferences. So this is something that we do on a regular basis. But of course, we also work with the IAEA extensively in various projects to support countries that have eventually weaker safety standards or a weaker regulatory infrastructure. So we are very active in that field, together, of course, also with a lot of other countries in this field.
On behalf of both Mona and myself and Atomic Reporters, I would like to thank our two speakers as well as the Vienna Diplomatic Academy for hosting this event. This is a very big issue. As we know, we are way over time. We had a very interesting discussion. And so I thank you as well.